Before 1952, almost no farmhouse in rural America had central heating, 0 furnace ducts, 0 gas lines running to the property. And yet, families raised kids through 40 below winters in Montana, in the Dakotas, in northern Minnesota, with nothing but a clay-packed barrel and a couple armloads of firewood. Nobody froze. Nobody went bankrupt paying a heating bill. There was no bill. There was no energy company. There was a barrel sitting in the corner of the main room doing something that the Department of Energy wouldn't get around to studying for another 70 years. They'd eventually give it a fancy name, thermal mass storage. But your great-grandmother just called it the stove. I spent 3 weeks going through agricultural extension records from the 1930s and 40s, county archives, land-grant university files. The kind of paperwork nobody touches anymore because it smells like mildew and cigarette smoke. And in those files, I found hand-drawn diagrams, pencil on graph paper, with detailed instructions for building a clay-lined barrel heater that holds warmth for 16 to 20 hours on a single burn. Materials cost was listed as, and I quote, negligible. The clay came from the creek behind the barn. The barrel was whatever they had lying around. In today's dollars, that's $27. And every winter, 300 million Americans drive past a hardware store that carries everything they'd need and instead wire $200 a month to a gas company. Not because the old way stopped working. It never stopped working. It stopped being remembered. This video is about remembering. Let's start with what actually happens inside that barrel. Because once you understand the physics, you're never going to look at a bag of clay the same way. Clay, regular, ordinary clay, the kind sitting 2 feet under your backyard, has a specific heat capacity of around 920 joules per kilogram per degree Celsius. That's higher than sand, higher than brick, higher than concrete. What that means in plain English is clay absorbs heat slowly, holds it stubbornly, and releases it at a rate that almost perfectly matches what a human body needs to stay comfortable in a cold room. That's not marketing. That's not some company trying to sell you something. That's just what the material does. It's been doing it for about 4 billion years. A 55-gallon steel drum lined with 4 inches of packed clay weighs roughly 350 pounds when it's loaded. You build a fire inside the combustion chamber. We'll get to the build in a minute. And within about 90 minutes, that clay mass hits somewhere around 400 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit at its core. The steel outer shell stays warm to the touch, but never dangerously hot, because the clay is doing what clay does. It's eating the heat, absorbing it, locking it in. Then the fire goes out. And here's where your great-grandfather would have smiled, because he already knew what was about to happen. 350 pounds of superheated clay starts radiating infrared energy into the room. Not hot air blowing through a vent. Not a space heater chewing through electricity at 18 cents a kilowatt hour. Infrared. The same kind of warmth you feel standing in October sunlight. It moves through the air without heating it and warms objects and surfaces directly. Your walls, your furniture, your body. You feel it in your bones before the thermometer even moves. A properly built clay barrel keeps a well-insulated 800 square foot cabin at 68 degrees for 14 to 18 hours after the fire is completely out. 2 burns a day in the dead of winter. 1 in the morning before coffee. 1 before bed. And the fuel is whatever deadfall and brush you drag out of the tree line behind your house. Now, I already know what some of you are thinking. If this thing is so great, why'd it disappear? And honestly, the answer is so boring it almost hurts. Where after World War II, the GI Bill put millions of young families into brand new suburban tract housing. Levittown, Cape Cods, cookie-cutter neighborhoods with gas furnaces already bolted into the basement before the first family even walked through the door. The post-war housing boom wasn't about better technology. It was about speed. Developers needed to build fast, sell fast, move on to the next block. A gas furnace takes 4 hours to install. A clay barrel heater takes a weekend to build and requires a chimney. And no developer on earth was going to let a homeowner slow down the production line for a barrel full of creek mud. Within 15 years, an entire generation grew up in houses where heat came from a thermostat on the wall. Click it up, warm air blows. That's all they ever knew. Their parents still remembered how to pack clay around a barrel. They didn't. Their grandparents could have built one blindfolded on a frozen morning. They'd never even heard of it. It wasn't suppressed. It wasn't banned. Nobody stood in front of Congress and outlawed clay barrel heaters. It was just inconvenient for the guys building suburbs at scale. And that was enough to erase 200 years of practical knowledge in about one generation. So here's where I walk you through how to build one. And I want to say something first. This is not complicated. Your great-grandfather built these with hand tools, no internet, no YouTube, and probably a cigarette hanging out of his mouth the whole time. If he could do it in 1938 with a wheelbarrow full of creek clay, you can handle a trip to the hardware store. Materials. 1. A 55-gallon steel drum. Used ones run $10 to $20 on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, or at a farm supply auction. Stay away from drums that held chemicals. You want a clean drum or one that stored food-grade product. If it smells like anything besides metal, skip it. 2. Clay. You need about 150 to 200 pounds of natural clay. If you've got clay soil on your property, and if you're anywhere east of the Rockies, you probably do, dig it up. Free. If not, a 50-pound bag of dry pottery clay runs $6 to $8 at a craft supply store. 3 or 4 bags gets you there. 3. Builder's sand, about 40 pounds. You mix this into the clay at a 3-to-1 ratio, clay to sand for crack resistance. $5. 4. Stovepipe. 6-inch diameter, single wall, black stovepipe for the chimney connection. $12 for a 3-foot section, enough to reach your chimney or wall thimble. 5. A steel grate or fire brick for the combustion floor. Pull one from an old grill or pick up a small section of expanded steel mesh for a few dollars. Total materials, if you're buying everything new, $22 to $27. And honestly, most folks with land won't even spend that because the clay's under their boots. The build. Step 1. Cut your barrel. You need a door opening in the front, roughly 10 by 12 inches, for loading fuel and lighting the fire, and a 6-inch round flue hole in the top for the stovepipe connection, angle grinder with a metal cutoff wheel, safety glasses, gloves. 10 minutes. Step 2. And this is the step that makes or breaks the whole thing. Mix your clay. 3 parts dry clay to 1 part sand by volume. Add water slowly until you get a consistency like thick peanut butter. Not soupy, not crumbly. You should be able to squeeze a handful and have it hold its shape without water dripping out the bottom. Step 3. Line the barrel. Start from the bottom. Pack a 2-inch layer of clay mix across the entire floor, pressing it in with your palm or a flat piece of wood. You're pushing out every air pocket you can. Air pockets crack when they heat up. Cracks bleed stored heat. Every pocket you miss is efficiency you'll never get back. Work your way up the walls. 4 inches thick, packed tight, smoothed flat. Does not need to be pretty. It needs to be dense. Denser clay stores more heat per cubic inch. Think of it like packing a snowball. The tighter you squeeze it, the longer it lasts. Leave the door opening and flue hole clear, then walk away. Let it air dry for 5 to 7 days before you even think about lighting a match. Do not rush this. Firing wet clay can crack the whole lining or, worst case, cause it to spall. Chunks popping off the wall from trapped steam. Patience here is the difference between a heater that lasts 10 years and one you're rebuilding next month. Step 4. Set your fire grate about 3 inches above the floor clay to create an air gap for primary combustion airflow. Air flows up through the fuel, gives you a cleaner and hotter burn, which means more energy absorbed per stick of wood and less smoke going up the pipe. Step 5. Stovepipe. 6-inch pipe into the top flue hole and sealed with furnace cement, not silicone, furnace cement. Run it to your existing chimney or through a wall thimble to the outside. Standard wood stove clearances. 18 inches from anything that can burn. If you're going through a wall, use an insulated thimble rated for solid fuel appliances. This is a fire safety thing, not a suggestion. Step 6. First burn. Resist the urge to load it up. Start with newspaper and kindling for about 30 minutes. Let the barrel cool completely. This slow cures the clay and prevents thermal shock cracks. Second fire. Go a little bigger. By the third or fourth burn, the clay is seasoned and you're running full loads. You'll feel the difference by the second night. The barrel stays warm hours after the fire dies, and the room holds temperature in a way that feels completely different from forced air. Quieter, steadier, more like being wrapped in something. Placement. This goes on a non-combustible surface. Concrete slab, tile hearth, cement board on the floor, 24 inches of clearance from every wall, and anything flammable. For a cabin or a main room, try to set it as close to center as your layout allows. Radiant heat works best when it can reach the most surfaces without furniture or walls in the way. Corner placement works, but center room pushes your coverage up by 20 to 30%. Now I want to talk about what this thing actually does and doesn't do. Because I'd rather you build one with the right expectations than build one expecting a miracle and throw it out when reality hits. It heats one room extremely well. A well-insulated space between 600 and 900 square feet. A cabin, a workshop, a homestead main room stays between 65 and 72 degrees through a full Dakota winter on 2 burns a day. I'm not guessing. There are people doing this right now in places where wind chill hits 40 below. It is not a whole house replacement for a 3,000 square foot colonial with cathedral ceilings and single pane windows from 1987. If that's what you need, this ain't your video. What this is a $27 guarantee that you will never be cold again if you don't want to be. Grid goes down? Doesn't matter. Gas prices double? Not your problem. Propane delivery doesn't show up after the ice storm. You've got a barrel full of clay, a pile of firewood, and the same technology that kept American families alive for 2 centuries before anyone invented a thermostat. Maintenance is almost nothing. Once a year, check for hairline cracks in the clay and patch them with a handful of fresh mix. Clean the stovepipe twice a season. That's the whole list. No filters, no motors, no parts to order. Your great-grandparents didn't use this because they were primitive. They used it because they were practical. They couldn't afford to be wasteful. So they figured out the most thermally efficient way to turn a pile of sticks into a warm house. And they packed it into a barrel with river clay because that's what the land gave them, and it worked better than anything they could buy. The question was never whether this technology is good enough. It kept families alive on this continent for 200 years. The real question is when we decided that forgetting it was progress. And maybe for $27 and one weekend, you can decide to remember.